Good morning, everyone, and welcome to TPS headquarters. Today, on behalf of the Financial Crimes Unit and the Coordinated Cyber Center, known as C3, I'm pleased to announce the results of Project Disrupt, a major SIM swap fraud investigation. Project Disrupt has resulted in 10 arrests and 108 charges laid. To begin with, I'd like to explain what a SIM swap scam is. A SIM swap scam is a type of account takeover fraud that generally targets a weakness in two-factor authentication and two-step verification. As you likely know, this is where the second factor or step is a text message or call placed to a mobile telephone. In this scheme, individuals compromise an unsuspecting victim's cell phone by switching the SIM card associated with the account, either by impersonating the customer at a cell phone store or otherwise gaining access to the account. Once they have access, they can receive any emails or texts related to password recovery or changes, and thus access and compromise any other accounts associated with the victim, such as online banking and social media accounts. In June of 2023, the Toronto Police Service Financial Crimes Unit, in partnership with C3, began an investigation into a SIM swap fraud scheme. It was alleged that perpetrators had taken over the cell phone accounts of multiple unsuspecting victims and made changes to the accounts, allowing them to access and compromise many of the victims' online accounts, including those at financial institutions. In many instances, the perpetrators impersonated victims at cell phone stores using convincing fraudulent identification. Often they would then use the same identification at the victim's financial institutions to take over their bank accounts. In other instances, the perpetrators gained access to cell phone accounts using phishing techniques, such as false web links and websites. It's important to note this investigation began with reports from multiple telecom companies, and that since the inception of Project Disrupt, the telecom companies have instituted additional security features and collaborated fully with TPS to help fight this fraud. To date, the Toronto Police Service has executed multiple search warrants and production orders during the course of this investigation. Over 400 fraudulent pieces of identification were seized during the execution of these warrants. The total combined loss to individual victims, telecom companies, and financial institutions is over $1 million. Over 1,500 cellular accounts are known to have been compromised throughout Canada. The names and charges of the 10 people arrested are available in the news release we just published. However, there are two suspects that remain outstanding that I'd really like to emphasize. Hervine Yumutajima, 26 years old, of Toronto. She's wanted for mischief to computer data, attempt fraud under, impersonation with intent, identity theft, use a forged document, and 7 counts of fraud under $5,000. And Nadia Campitelli, 47 years of age, of Toronto. She's wanted for 3 counts of fraud over $5,000, fraud under $5,000, intercept private communications, and breach of probation. Nadia Campitelli, in particular, is wanted on multiple warrants across Ontario and is known to be active Canada-wide for her alleged participation in these types of financial frauds, including those committed here in Toronto. To conclude, this investigation highlights the important collaboration between our Financial Crimes Unit and our Coordinated Cyber Center, C3. This collaboration is crucial and essential going forward, as fraud has become so heavily reliant on the internet, and is just one of many examples of how the Toronto Police Service will continue to evolve and adapt to continue the fight against fraud. By working together, we were able to tackle this complex and widespread criminal activity more effectively. I want to thank members of the Toronto Police Service, and in particularly those from the Financial Crimes Unit and the Coordinated Cyber Center, C3, for their diligent work on this project. Thank you, and as mentioned, I will take questions as well as DC Mike Gow from C3 for the more difficult technical questions.
Detective Coffey, Sean O'Shea with Global News. Good morning. Are any of the suspects, the arrested suspects, were any of them employed by any of the cellular phones or the mobile phone stores, the companies? Korea,
I don't.
Rogers.
Thank you. I don't believe so.
To my knowledge, no.
No.
All of them out on bail this time?
Well, they have been charged. I know one of them pled guilty in court yesterday. I haven't got the details of the sentencing yet, but one has pled guilty, and the others are out on bail, yes.
With Natty, we saw the photo. It looks like she has a previous criminal record. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you determined to be more of a mastermind of this project than some of the others were just...
No, she's not a mastermind. She's known as what we call a runner or a striker who goes into the businesses with the fake ID.
From your understanding, did the phone companies enhance their security? You mentioned this, but to what extent did they enhance their security? Because it looks like those IDs were pretty good.
Yeah, well, the IDs are always very good. I can't get into the details of how they've enhanced their security and minimized the chances of this occurring. It still does occur, but not to the effect that it did before this project began.
A quick question. The CBC French, by the way, do you speak French?
I don't, I apologize.
So can you expand a little bit more about this scheme, how it was organized, how many people were part of it, how did they collaborate together, where are they?
Sure, I'll ask DC Gowda.
Thank you. So to expand on the scheme and how the SIM swap attacks occur, to explain, it's not taking over somebody's SIM card and physically putting it into a phone. What occurs is the suspects will control their device, they'll have their own separate device, and they socially engineer, which is also known as human hacking. So they're able to convince the telecommunication companies that they are in fact the customer that they're going after. They will then use that customer's information, bypass security, and then they'll take over the phone number and tell the communication company to transfer the phone number of the affected customer over to the SIM card that they possess. Once that's done, then they are now in possession of the phone number. Once they're in possession of the phone number, not the phone itself and the content on the phone number itself is used for two-factor authentication. So they'll go to something like their email, and they'll hit the forgot my password button on the email. And that one-time password to take over that email account and change passwords is then sent to the suspects, not the victims. So from the victim's perspective, all they see is SOS in the top right-hand corner of their phone. So what that means is there's a SIM card in their phone and it's not transmitting any signal. So the victim is none the wiser of what's happening. And all they know is this stuff is happening in the background, and they lose access to their bank accounts, they lose access to a lot of different things, and they only find out after the fact. And many of these go unreported just because, strictly speaking, when the victims see what happens, they just see a fraud happening to their bank account. They don't actually see that a SIM swap occurred. They don't know because they just saw a minor temporary outage. Everything gets switched back to their phone, but they've lost funds from their bank account. They've lost cryptocurrency from their crypto accounts. They've lost access to their social media, and they don't know why.
But the people who committed this scheme, the suspects, are they organized together? Who are they? How many of them are there?
So from our findings, what we have found that they work in groups. From other investigations too, we've seen that they have multiple layers that they work together. They'll have a person that can socially engineer, a person that will make the phone call, the person that will transfer from one to another. But then there's another person usually in the background that might be a computer tech-savvy person that could answer those questions, that could go in the background, that knows how to access social media, knows how to take over those passwords, break into accounts. More or less kind of like a hacker. They're able to do that stuff in the background. It's usually several layers involved of people doing these investigations.
But to be clear, Detective Gow, the vulnerability here, it all is allowed to happen because the mobile phone company allows the change to occur, correct? They were defrauded effectively, right? To allow the password to be changed, to be able to have somebody take things over, right? That's where the vulnerability is, right?
The vulnerability is in the mobile phone company when they're being socially engineered. So the front-end employees, we talk about front-end store employees, we talk about the communication centers. They're the ones being called and being spoken to, and it's ultimately the ones that are behind the whole thing. The ones to blame are we've highlighted 10 people already. They're the ones calling in, posing as citizens, posing as other people, posing as those customers with convincing IDs. And the one thing we'll get into, we always tell people to protect their identity, know their digital footprint. when you're online. If people are sharing a lot of information about themselves online, that's all open source. So what the bad guys are doing is we're finding they're doing their own open source intelligence, or OSINT, into their targets beforehand. They're looking for juicy targets. They're looking for people where they can get a greater yield from. So they're looking at their targets, almost cyber stalking them beforehand, and then once they have enough information, then they execute and they'll socially engineer the telecommunications, the banks, and go after them.
The gatekeepers here, the ones that were allowing it to happen based on the fraudulent identities and the scam, those are mobile phone companies, right? Without their pressing the button and allowing this to happen, people don't get caught.
They control the phone numbers.
You said that there were also phishing tactics.
Yes.
Which means people
There's multiple tactics that are involved with the SIM-swap attacks. What we found, one of the tactics they use is again, social engineering. They'll call in and pose as a technical support for one of the companies, still going after those front-end, low-end employees. They'll go after them and they'll say, we're support, you're going to be away, we need to do some system maintenance on your account. Posing as IT, they'll send them a fake phishing link or a fraudulent site. They'll log into that site, type in their credentials, and it's those credentials which are harvested in the background using key logging. So they'll get those credentials. Once those credentials are obtained, the bad guys can access the credentials and then perform the swaps.
I just want to refine my question from earlier. I asked whether any of the suspects worked in the stores. What I meant to ask was, did any of the suspects that you've arrested work for any of the mobile companies at the back end or the front end?
Still, to my knowledge, no.
The 1,500 cellular accounts throughout Canada that have been affected, does that mean there's still outstanding victims of this project?
So yes, good question. The reason we know there's 1,500 victims is part of the investigation into the SIM swap attacks. When a SIM swap occurs, they said the suspect's phone is taking over the cellular data. What happens is that we know from a telecom standpoint is that they are intercepting the phone number, and the telecoms can track the IMEI, or the device number that's associated with that phone. When we do an investigation into that IMEI or that device, the suspect's device, we can see every single phone number that's activated on that device. So to give an example, we started up this investigation into SIM-swap started back in 2021. We had one victim, and that one victim turned into 48 victims. So we could see that one suspect device had been used to SIM-swap 49 people total. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And to your point earlier about being cyber stalked, these, what can people do to protect themselves from this?
Yeah, so great question. Basically, the things people can do to protect themselves, number one, I said before, is know your digital footprint. We teach this all the time in C3 when we teach communities, when we teach our own police officers too. Know what you're leaving behind when you're on the internet, when you're sharing stuff. If I were to take a picture of all of us right here and put hashtag Toronto Police headquarters, hashtag Toronto Police, everything I'm posting online, there's a digital footprint attached, and I'm leaving a story behind that somebody can extract from. So when you're posting online, be aware of what you're posting, be aware of how public it is, understand your privacy settings, and try to limit that, what you're exposing to the public. Because like I said, if they're cyber stalking you and they're going after you, the more information you're presenting online, the more they have to equip themselves to pose as you. Early on, they used to have surveys, internet surveys, where people post questions like your security questions, like your dog's name, your first dog's name, your mother's maiden name. Those questions, be aware of, and the source of when you're answering those things. So if you find those surveys online, avoid them if you don't know the source, if it's not a trusted source. So just be careful and cautious when you're posting that stuff. The other tactics and things you could do, and this is one we're doing right now, is education. I mentioned earlier, we talked about the 1,500 plus victims. The big thing to note with that is that even though we could see every single phone number associated that those were being compromised, we're very careful not to say everyone was a victim, because some of those phone numbers might have been suspects putting their own SIM card number and putting their phone in there. The kicker is that we cross-reference every one of those numbers with our own police database. And I can tell you only a handful of them actually reported to the police. This crime is going vastly unreported, and we're trying to change that by educating the public. That's part of why we're trying to disrupt the whole system and the whole criminal enterprise here. By educating the public, they know when a SIM swap occurring. They know that if they're in the middle of downtown Toronto, their phone goes to SOS mode. When they see that, they can know that something's peculiar. If they're in a subway tunnel or they're golfing at the middle of Rice Lake, they can see that there's probably a chance that it's natural that might go to SOS. They're not getting any signal because they're in the middle of nowhere. But there's cell towers around you and that's happening, that's a red flag. So to educate people to know that the red flags, understand when this stuff's happening in the background, and just ask the questions. If you ask the questions when you go to your telecom provider, when you go to the banks, they're now educated in this. They know what it is. We're trying to educate TD, CIBC, all the banks as we go through, and we're presenting to them what SIM swaps are so they can be well equipped to try and prevent it. Some of the other things that can be done, disabling two-factor authentication where you can. Not every application will allow two-factor authentication through call or text. If you can disable it and use a different method of authentication, say Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, or other like apps, that would be ideal. Not every application will allow this. So being aware of that, that is a major factor that can prevent this. We always say in cybersecurity as well as frauds, be vigilant. If you see anything online, if you notice any anomalies in your bank account, any anomalies in social media, anything at all with your accounts, report it to the company itself. If it's you sense a fraud or you find a fraud, report it to the police, report it to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. By reporting these things, you equip us with the tools we need to make these arrests.
From your investigation and from the arrests here, what did you find that the financial institutions did with respect to the customers, the consumers, the victims, when it came to giving their money back or making them whole? Because as I found in doing these stories, the reality is people are generally out of pocket and can't get any money back. So broadly speaking, did the financial institutions and the carriers step up to take any responsibility for this? Because the reality is a lot of people didn't do anything wrong when they got scammed.
So I can't speak broadly to it. I have specific examples where we had case studies or cases that happened and occurred, and when they were aware that it was at fault for the telecommunication or the bank, they would refund the money. But as I said, a lot of these go unreported. I can't speak to people who don't speak to us. So if you report these things, we can talk to them and communicate, but we can understand the stuff's happening in the background. But we didn't have a mass group of people saying, we lost our money, and then we would contact them and get their money back. That wasn't happening. Sorry.
And with respect to punishment and accountability, you talked about somebody pleading guilty. What are the repercussions to the scammers that steal millions of dollars from people? I don't think that they're terribly great, but I'd like to hear what you're going to say.
Right. Well, the people are all still before the court, so we don't have an end number on what they will accrue. Like I said, one has pled guilty yesterday. I'd only like to say I wish it was more. The criminal code allows for higher penalties than what these fraudsters are generally getting. We'd like to see more, but that is out of our realm of responsibility, and that's before the courts.